Okay, order. Now, can I remind members that if you wish to speak, you need to bob during the debate. Secondly, the number of people here, this is only a 1 hour debate, and you can see from the numbers present, and you don't need to be an expert in maths, that there's a lot of people. So I'm only going to allow, except for the front bench speakers, a minute for each of those present, and when those minutes exhaust themselves, such that there's sufficient time for the front bench to speak, then obviously any speakers not been called will not be called. Also, members will be tempted to intervene, which again will take time away from other speakers. Can I ask that you resist the urge to intervene unless you absolutely have to? So, without further ado, can I say that this House has considered the statutory framework from home to school transport for children with special educational needs. I call Jane Craft to move the motion.
Thank you. I'd like to move that this House has considered the statutory framework for home to school transport for children with SEND. It's a great pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Sir Mark, and I'm delighted to have secured this debate on the 3rd of December, which is the International Day for People with Disabilities. I'm pleased to see a number of honourable members present to speak, and it truly reflects the importance of this issue. Currently, disabled children enter the education system with the odds stacked against them. The damage and chaos wrought by 14 years of underfunding and understaffing has left a broken SEND system. Parents have to fight for the entitlements of their child at every step of the way, simply to ensure they are given the same life chances as other children. As the parent of a disabled child, I've experienced this firsthand. We know how vital each stage of the journey through education is for a disabled child. The importance of early intervention cannot be disputed, providing crucial support to their development and improving long-term outcomes. And similarly, the transition to adulthood is a key stage of development, when disabled young people advance their independence and encounter new challenges. Yet, as it stands, we have a statutory framework for home-to-school transport that, in effect, excludes disabled children from accessing education. Even where the statute necessitates LAs provide home-to-school transport, this is often disputed and subject to many shortcomings, leaving parent carers with another fight on their hands. However, it's the framework that I will focus on today. Under the existing framework, it is only in the case of children aged 5 to 16 and young people aged 19 to 25 that local authorities have a legal obligation to provide free transport to their education. This is a vital lifeline for disabled children and their families. It ensures that even those with the most complex needs can attend a school that offers specialist provision to help them get on in life. But until they reach the age of 5, and after the statutory duty falls at the age of 16, disabled children and their families are failed by the current system. Before turning 5, it is the discretion of local authorities to make suitable arrangements for a disabled child to attend early years settings. In reality, this can materialise as a flat refusal to any request for transport. Families who have been fortunate enough to secure a competitive place at specialist early years setting are then denied support and unable to shoulder the burden of time and cost needed to transport their child themselves. One parent told me that the only school suitable for their complex child's health condition was an 11-mile drive from home. Their transport application was rejected. That parent now drives the child to school and stays there as they cannot afford to petrol for 4 trips a day, leaving them unable to work. Families are forced to make the impossible choice between transporting their child themselves or giving up work. And those children who are at most at need for early intervention are unable to access it. Some local authorities will even refuse to transport a child at primary school until the very day that they turn 5, by which time a disabled child may have missed a term of reception and lost out on vital therapies and specialised support. This leaves disabled children playing catch-up from day one. By the age of 16, many children with SEND will have been receiving free transport for over a decade. But as the legal obligation for this provision falls, their education can be thrown into turmoil. In the past, many councils continue to provide free transport for children with SEND from the ages of 16 to 19. Funds put into these travel costs are saved further down the line, They allowed students with disabilities to achieve qualifications and skills, gain confidence, independence and experience. This makes it much less likely that they will fall into unemployment, disengagement and challenges with mental and physical health. However, the rising demand, with 576,000 children and young people now with an EHCP in England, coupled with LAs being under immense financial strain, has led to local authorities across the country, including my constituency of Thurrock, cutting this service.
Would you give way on that point?
I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and she's making some excellent comments. She refers to the transportation as being free, which for some of those families it absolutely is free, but for local authorities, as we all know, it absolutely isn't. My local authority of North East Lincolnshire spent £1.4 million last year alone on transporting 114 children out of area. It's unsustainable for local authorities. Does she agree with me that the answer to this is more specialist provision in area as well as combined support in mainstream school for those children?
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention, and she does make a good point. The long-term goal must be better inclusion in mainstream education for disabled children. Even for my own example, I would have loved to send my child to the outstanding school up the road. They didn't really want to. So, it's not a choice that parents want to make. That is the ultimate long-term solution. But disabled children should not be penalised for the financial burdens that councils find themselves under. So the transport arrangements provided can often be unsuitable, such as a bus pass for a vulnerable young person, and parents are asked to make financial contributions that barely cover, or provided with travel allowances that barely cover the costs. It's hard to understate the impact that this yearly lottery for school transport can have on disabled children. It disrupts their education, places stress and anxiety on them and their families, reduces their independence, and asks their parents to carry financial costs. I heard from one mother whose 18-year-old daughter attends a school offering specialist provision. This year, she was told she will be charged a contribution for her daughter's transport to school just 24 hours before her daughter was due to start her college course. She spoke of the anxiety inflicted upon her daughter through days of uncertainty. Despite this stressful experience, the mother considers herself among the lucky ones. Her vulnerable daughter can continue to get to school safely every day when others who are asked to contribute may not.
On that point,
I will go.
I thank my honourable friend and congratulate her for securing this debate. Does she agree that in too many cases, struggling with families who are most at need of support often find that they're not given that support, and therefore for many families this comes down to it is a question of whether they can afford to support their children, and in this country in 2024 we must end that barrier to opportunity.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and again he makes an excellent point. It is unacceptable that disabled families are faced with the choices about their children's education that parents of children who are not disabled are not faced with. I spoke to another woman, Julia, during the election campaign and had the pleasure of meeting her 18-year-old son, Oscar, who has cerebral palsy affecting his right side and epilepsy. For 10 years, he had been receiving free home school transport, and now every year his parents have to make the case for why he should continue receiving this support to reach his sixth form. Thanks to the new costs, his mum has had to withdraw one of his sessions at his weekend care provision as she cannot afford both. And despite these new charges, there is still no guarantee their application will be approved. She said life is hard enough without this discrimination and pressure. And one other mother in Thurrock told me about her ongoing fight to secure transport for her daughter. Twice she was refused passenger transport to the education setting she was attending, and twice the family successfully appealed. She said, as parents to children with SEND, we have to fight for every single step for their existence, fighting for what is right, for what our children are entitled to. This is the reality for thousands of families across the country. This disruption at such a vital point in education can be devastating, with serious impacts on a young person's mental health and development. And let's be clear, this places a financial barrier to education on disabled children and their families that other families simply do not have to face. I will give way.
Very briefly, would she acknowledge that lots of local authorities, indeed lots of schools, seek to do the right thing? the councils in Cumbria have more than doubled their spending on SEND transport in the last 5 years. But isn't that the worst thing about it from a local authority perspective, that councils and schools that do the right thing get penalised? Isn't it right instead that we support all local authorities and all schools to support special educational needs children without disadvantaging them or indeed their families?
I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention, and as I've said previously, I think the important thing is to see a long-term goal in which disabled children are truly able to receive a mainstream, inclusive education, and so we get out of this cycle of having to pay to transport them miles and miles from where they live.
Speakers not obliged to take interventions. It does take time away from those who put in to speak.
Thank you. So I'll make further headway. And yet the requirement for free transport returns for 19 to 25-year-olds with complex needs and an education, health and care plan to support those who need longer in education or training to achieve their outcomes. The guidance itself allows that it is critical that from year 9 at the latest, local authorities help young people start planning for a successful transition to adulthood. Given the importance of this transition, why between the ages of 16 to 19 does this statutory obligation for free transport fall? We cannot ignore the rising costs that councils face in carrying out their duty for free home-to-school transport, but these costs are not the fault of disabled children. It is not a choice by families to send their disabled child or young person to a school far from home. It is a necessity, and the only way they can receive specialist provision that meets their needs. I would just like to make a little bit more progress, thank you. When I think about my child's journey through education, I do not see it in stages. The journey for my daughter and for every disabled child is a lifelong one. I believe we need a statutory framework that reflects this, providing stability, security and reassurance for disabled children and their families throughout their development. Because in the context of the government's mission to break down barriers to opportunity for every child, home-to-school transport is damaging life chances for disabled pupils. I encourage the Minister to consider a framework that closes the current anomalies in the system, so local authorities have a legal obligation to ensure no child is denied an education that allows them to get on in life. I look forward to hearing the Minister's considerations of the existing framework, as well as the contributions of other members, as we seek to develop a system that ensures the needs of every child is met.
As I said earlier, that you'll only get a minute each. Can I encourage people, please, not to intervene on other speakers, because it'll just mean that we have to cut down on the total number of speakers. I call Shoka Adam.
Thank you. During this very vital debate, which is of a great concern to many of my constituents. First and foremost, education is a fundamental right for every child and should not be treated as a favour or a privilege. We are witnessing firsthand how the lack of adequate travel provisions can prevent children from accessing their education. The consequences of not providing proper travel services extend far beyond the immediate inconvenience to parents. Without transport, children will either remain at home, where they are not engaged in either education or employment. The social cost of this is immense. Parents will be forced to reduce their working hours or even give up their jobs entirely. We must ask ourselves, is this the kind of future we create for our children and our communities? Travel arrangements for these children are more than just about convenience. This is about ensuring they can get to school safely and on time. And furthermore, we must ask ourselves the reality of send children travelling 2 hours daily. As the Honourable Member for Grimsby mentioned, that the cost is not the issue here, it's the fact that there's no provisions available locally. That's why parents are forced to send their children so far away. And what impact must be this having on their well-being? We must have more facilities in more schools.
I call Joe Platt.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I briefly want to just mention my local authority with regard to this very, very important issue, and I thank my honourable friend for bringing this forward. Since 2017, the number of children and young people requiring SEND transport has surged by over 80% in Wigan. But meanwhile, the costs have exploded by 103%. So to put this into perspective, this year alone, they are facing a £2 million overspend against a £5.53 million budget. So over the last 5 academic years, demand for SEND transport has skyrocketed, and it's a sustainable trajectory that cannot be ignored. And as my honourable friend has rightly pointed out, the statutory framework is no longer fit for purpose. So this issue extends far beyond any one council or region. The pressures we are seeing are a national concern. Local authorities, which are already stretched thin, are facing mounting financial strain, and if we don't act soon, we risk eroding the very support that children with SEND rely on to access their education.
Hear, hear.
Thank you. I call Tom Gordon.
Thank you very much, Sir Mark, for this debate under your chairmanship, and thank you to the honourable member for bringing it forward. I think one of the points that I'd just like to make, and I'll try and keep it brief, is just around the inconsistency in implementation of the framework, and that's exacerbated in areas which are particularly rural, like North Yorkshire, where my constituency of Harrogate and Knaresborough is. We've had horror stories of parents who've ended up with children in taxis for up to 2 hours a day sometimes, which just massively impacts on their ability to learn when they actually make their way to school. I think one of the problems that we've also seen is that changes to the council's local policy on home-to-school transport and the inability for them to be able to finance it. We know that they're projecting actually a spend of £27 million on SEND transport just next year, and that comes at the same time, despite the rural complexities of North Yorkshire Council, is only funded 148 out of 151 local authorities for high needs funding per head of population. So whilst this framework's really important, I think there does need to be an element of understanding the rurality into it, and then obviously the funding to go with that. And thank you very much for bringing forward the debate.
Thank you. I call Darren Paffey.
Thank you, Sir Mark. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I thank and congratulate my honourable friend for this clearly very important and oversubscribed debate. The one point I would make in the time available is that Southampton, like many other authorities, is struggling with the costs of meeting the need, and that meeting of need is the most important, but when costs are trebling within the last few years, that puts council resources under immense strain. I welcome the Education Secretary's commitment to a whole system review, and I think travel is an absolutely crucial part of that. The Chancellor's investments recently will have relieved some of the pressure. But perhaps, and I'd be interested in the Minister's response to a suggestion that perhaps the DFT and the DFE could speak a little bit more together to look at, for those for whom this would be possible, particularly as they're getting to an age where there's independent travel training possible, whether bus companies could be required to work with local authorities to look at route planning, to look at making public transport more accessible for those for whom that would be possible. In any case, this is about breaking down barriers to opportunity for SEND children. They have to be in school to open those barriers up and so that we can meet those needs.
I call Callum Miller.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mark. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Thurrock for securing this debate. I want to focus on the length of time that young people with SEND often spend travelling to their special settings. This weekend at my surgery, a mother attended to speak of her son, who was initially offered a taxi ride to his special school outside the county, taking 45 minutes. Another child was added to the journey. Picking up that child took the journey time to 1 hour and 15, and a third child has now been added. And that boy who has special needs, who struggles travelling with other children, is now taking 1 hour and 45 minutes to travel in each direction to school. Oxfordshire is not unlike other counties, and my constituents in Bicester and Woodstock often have to send their children outside the county for education. So I very much hope that this government will consider more capital funding to local education authorities so they can provide more special schools and better settings. And I'd also ask the Minister whether she would consider a commitment that no special educational needs or child should have to travel for more than 30 minutes to reach their school every day.
I call Alistair Strathern.
Thank you, Mr. Mark. I'd like to thank my honourable friend for delivering not just this debate but her tireless work campaigning on this issue, and it's really encouraging to be joined by so many colleagues from across the House speaking about issues relating to SEND here today too. I rise today to highlight some of the shocking stories that families locally have been sharing with me about the challenges and pressures that special education needs and home-to-school transport are causing them and their day-to-day lives. It cannot be right that so many are not getting the support they need, whether they sit in or even outside the statutory framework, as my honourable friend has rightly highlighted today. In both central Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire, the rural context has been exacerbated by a failure to appropriately place plan at local level by both authorities, creating difficult choices for the authorities but heartbreaking realities for families and young people who are travelling far too far at far too greater cost to access the school they need, with some being shut out of support due to their age for the transport they need. I really welcome this debate. I really welcome the highlight on possible reforms to that statutory framework, and I look forward to working with colleagues right across the House to make sure we're bringing about the holistic reform this area desperately needs.
I call Clive Jones.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Sir Mark, and I thank the honourable member for Thurrock for securing this debate. Wokingham Borough Council had previously been promised 2 send free schools, yet both are waiting for approval to proceed. And therefore I would be incredibly grateful if the Minister could do some digging into when the schools will be delivered and write a letter to me updating and to the Council updating us on their progress. I had prepared quite a lot more detailed remarks, but therefore I asked the Minister if they will meet with me, the local executive member for Children's Services and the Children's Services Director at Wokingham Borough Council to discuss Wokingham's situation and to help us understand the government's plans for reform and what we can do to deliver the most for our SEND children.
I call Paul Hamilton.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the member of Thurrock for securing this important debate. Many parents and children in my constituency of Birmingham Erdington are deeply frustrated because of the cuts that we've seen in school transport. It's gone from cuts to now we get nothing for the over 16s. One mother said to me that her son, a boy with Down syndrome, was actually forced to stay at home because he could no longer get the support he needed for transport. Chair, transport should never be a barrier to education. I welcome the government's pledge of the investment of £1 billion, but may I ask that the Chair so that the funding is delivered swiftly and effectively to address the urgent needs of family and those in the community. These families deserve dignity, support and access to education that every child has the right to deserve. Thank you, Chair.
I call Monica Harding.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I thank the member for Thurrock for bringing this debate. I want to give you some colour on what is happening in Surrey in my constituency of East and Walton. My constituent is Polly, is 16 years old. Due to her SEND needs, she's unable to travel unaccompanied, something not disputed by the council. And until the end of last term, she received travel. Now she has a place at a special needs sixth form and has been denied assistance. Her parents appealed the decision and were denied again, and in rejecting her appeal, Surrey's Stage 2 panel made a financial argument asserting that it would not be sustainable for the council to provide travel assistance on account of her parents' work commitments. Both of Polly's parents work full-time at Royal Surrey Hospital, and in determining what is necessary for the child, they take account of the special educational needs, but not the work of the parents or carers. This current statutory framework leads to the absurd economisation in which the jobs of 2 NHS workers cannot be considered in the allocation of a child's transport assistance. So she therefore must choose between Polly's education or her parents' jobs in the NHS. That's not acceptable.
Thank you. Daniel Francis.
Thank you, Sir Mark, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. My constituent Jessica has raised the case of her son. London Borough Bexley introduced a charging policy for post-16 children back in 2018, and despite her son not changing schools, she found that he now has to pay £400 towards the transport to reach his school in the London Borough of Bromley. Despite the fact that he is on the highest rate of mobility component for PIP, despite the fact she receives universal credit, there are children in the same class who are Bromley children and who don't have to pay that charge and that contribution. And clearly the current system that we've seen that crisis in school transport, my own local authority had 7 local government ombudsman cases against it in 2018, a further report finding failings because it didn't remedy those cases, and because of those failings you have situations like Jessica's raised where her son has to contribute, or she has to contribute that £400 towards transport, and yet children in the same class with identical circumstances, because they live in a different London borough, are not having to contribute. The system does need some reform, therefore. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I call Manuela Pertegella.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and thank you to the member for Thurrock for bringing this important debate. In Stratford-on-Avon, the current system of send home-to-school transport is failing families. Many children were left without home-to-school transport at the beginning of the academic year, and this meant that the educational needs of children were not met at a very crucial time. Many children are placed in schools outside the country because there simply isn't enough suitable provision locally, and this has created a complex transport network of transport issues. We need to ensure and resource sufficient local SEND provision within the mainstream education. This must be a priority if we are to create a fairer, more efficient and sustainable system that supports every child's right to education. Thank you.
I call Perrin Moon. Oh, sorry. Next speaker, Jonathan Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Mark. It's a pleasure to serve on your chairmanship. The Honourable Lady from Thurrock for bringing this debate. Send and the transport around it is a massive issue in Derbyshire, and a recent Ofsted report found appalling failings in the system, something that parents would have told you anecdotally for a very long time. There's two things I would suggest that the Council need to do. Firstly, we need better integration between the Council, between the public transport providers, the ICBs and the schools, and we need more early planning so that transport can be managed at the earliest possible stage. It will save money for the Council and it's better for the children and young people. The government's made a big investment in this at the recent budget. We've made some tough choices to do that, but it's the right thing to do. It's £1 billion for SEND. There's 3-year funding settlements for local authorities and further investment in councils. I urge the Council to use that investment, to give it the time to get this right, because it's local children, young people and their parents who are suffering.
Thank you. I call Iqbal Mohammed.
Thank you, Sir Mark. It's a pleasure to serve with your chairship, and thank you, Honourable Member for Thurrock, for securing this important debate. In my constituency of Dewsbury and Backley, there are over 300 pupils of sixth form age with SEND needs who are currently eligible to have their costs covered by the local authority. Unfortunately, the council budget to cover their costs has just been slashed by 1.6 million. The result is that the families will have to cover the shortfall themselves, and that picture is repeated up and down the country because, as the National Audit Office warns, the current system of funding is unsustainable due to the crises in local government funding. The situation is only going to get worse when we consider the number of children in England with an EHCP plan has more than doubled over the past decade, and we can expect it to continue to rise. While I welcome plans to improve existing provision to build a more integrated system that includes the NHS, we also need to ensure the funding streams are there to ensure SEND children from all socio-economic backgrounds can access improved services. A good start to that end would be if this government listened to those teaching unions, local authorities and families calling for extra SEND funding and for councils' high needs deficits to be written off. Thank you.
I call Jodie Gosling.
That's a good start. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to serve under you, Mark, and thank you to my honourable member for calling this important debate. If hopefully I can manage to get through it. Thank you. I would like to start off by explaining the fact I'm coming at this from a SENCO point of view. I've been an early years special needs supporter for a number of years. I understand just how difficult it actually is in the current provisions to actually get an EHCP for a child under 5. And after you've managed to secure that, we then go through from the nursery's point of view the applications to schools, and finally, if you manage to secure a good provision for a child, then what happens is you can't secure the transport arrangements, or the child can't secure a chaperone. And as we're extending our childcare offer and our early years education offer to 2 years old, we have to be able to consider the transport and the SEND needs for children as young as 2 to ensure that these children who have managed to reach a threshold for an early years education healthcare plan so young are the most vulnerable and desperately need to be able to access the best support from the start. And we need to have have a strategy in order to deliver them locally and in where we can't, to make sure that they have access to the best provisions so that they are actually starting in the early years where the impact of their of the interventions has the most impact. Thank you.
Call Laura Kirk-Smith.
Just under your chairmanship. I'd like to highlight 3 suggestions that I've heard from my constituents in Aylesbury. First is that information about home-to-school transport is provided to parents in a timely and accurate way. I've heard so many parents finally secure that school place and then fall at the final hurdle of not being given transport. Councils have to change that. Second, Buckinghamshire Council is moving towards personal transport budgets, but the £20 per day doesn't go near to covering what in one case I've heard is an £84 taxi return fare to get the child to school. The councils need to allocate sufficient funding. Third, councils must ensure that the transport that is provided is both safe and reliable, and unfortunately I've heard of that not being the case. Those transport providers need much tighter regulation. No one wants to send their child to school many miles away, but the broken send system necessitates it, and that has to change. Thank you.
Yeah. I call Anna Gelder.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and thank you to my honourable friend, the member for Thurrock, for securing this crucial debate. The issue of home-to-school transport for SEND children requires our urgent attention, and that's why I'm planning to create a network in South East Cornwall dedicated to supporting families, parents and carers. South East Cornwall is a rural area with challenging transport network, and difficulties arise from these longer distances to schools, a good quality local public transport and increased costs. I want to take this opportunity to pay tribute to some of the staff at specialist provisions in South East Cornwall, such as Burriton School and at Liscard School and Community College, and to highlight local organisations like Cornwall Sendias and the Corps, who provide vital support for families navigating these challenges, but these groups cannot and should not be expected to fill gaps. The statutory framework for home-to-school travel must better account for the unique barriers in rural areas such as mine, and assumptions are often made about transport infrastructure levels. The reality is that some of this infrastructure just does not exist, and the statutory walking distance is often unrealistic for rural children who often live far from safe walking routes or bus stops, and with increased journey times. I'd like to urge the Minister to prioritise an in-depth consultation with SEND families, especially in rural areas, to better understand their needs and unique situations and how to tailor services accordingly. Thank you.
I call Anna Dixon.
Thank you, Sir Mark. I wasn't bobbing, but I'll happily take a moment if I may. And it's an honour to speak under your chairmanship, Sir Mark, and I thank the Honourable Member for Thurrock for securing this debate. As a member of the Public Accounts Committee, I've had to scrutinise the National Audit Office's report into SEN. And according to that report, local authorities spent some £1.4 billion on home-to-school transport in 2022-23, an 80% real terms increase from 2015 to 2016. So I am delighted that this government has brought forward additional £1 billion in the recent budget for SEND funding. It will go some way to cover the very high costs that local authorities are facing. But we know that we have to actually change provision. In Bradford, the Council's Travel Assistance Service is spending on home-to-school taxis alone £54,000 per day. These numbers are eye-watering, in my opinion. And it is only through prioritising SEND support in our mainstream local schools, and again, I welcome the priority that the government are giving to this, that we can both alleviate these financial pressures on local authorities, but I think the main point of this debate is that it will actually help all those many families and outcomes for disabled children and their families if they can actually have their children in local schools, not only reducing the need for these expensive transport costs, but also improving the outcomes for children. So thank you, Sir Mark.
Call Josh Fenton-Glynn.
Thank you, Sir Mark. It's an honour to serve under your chairmanship. I'd like to thank my honourable friend, the member for Thurrock, for securing this debate, because while she has personal and constituency experience, it's a national crisis for SEND. And in no small part, that is because of the huge rise in people who are on EHCPs that has happened over the last few years. In Calderdale, where Calder Valley sits, in 2018-19, there were 1,068 children with EHCPs, and in the last year, there were 1,761. And that's the start of this problem. You then have then we have the transport plans put together at the last minute, and you end up with this September stress for SEND parents who are trying to create a stable environment for school for their kids, and they only find out at the last minute when they're coming in. On this point, I'd like to pay tribute to all of the SEND parents who work out an extra job for their for looking after their children, and some of the charities that do brilliant work supporting them, including Unique Ways in Calder Valley, who are fantastic charity. I recently heard a particularly distressing story about Calder Valley's SEND provision with 2 children who had epilepsy triggered by stress, they both it was triggered by stress, and both parents and teachers struggled to actually provide the right support that they needed. Thank you.
Well, Ben Coleman.
May I thank my honourable friend for Thurrock for this debate. It is absolutely fantastic to see so many members, so many honourable friends here as well, sticking up for disabled children and young people and their families, and this reflects the focus that we've also had on SEND in this new Parliament. According to Contact, a charity for families with disabled children aged 25 or under, 79% of disabled young people are being denied or charged for school transport when they turn 16. 1 in 10 of these is paying more than £1,000 a year, and nearly half of the families are experiencing increased stress and financial difficulties. And so, Mark, while I'm pleased that in Fulham, which is part of my constituency, the Labour Council there has chosen not to charge for transport and to maintain free educational transport for disabled children and young people up to the age of 25. I recognise from all that I've heard today and all that I know, this is very far from the case elsewhere. And so we need to end this unfairness, we need to change the statutory framework, and we need to make free educational transport available for all up to the age of 25. And finally, may I just add that for those who would like to know more about the additional costs, significant additional costs for caring for disabled children and young people, may I encourage them to come to an event tomorrow, which I'm going to be chairing at 5:30 in the Thatcher Room, where Contact is going to be launching new research into this. Thank you.
I call Danny Beales.
Thank you to Mark, and thank you to my honourable friend for securing such an important debate. My casework has been inundated by issues around special educational needs, and transport is one of the major factors. I just wanted to make 2 quick observations which I hope the Minister might reflect on in any review of the framework. Firstly, often families and the nature of families today doesn't reflect assumptions of previous years. I've had cases where parents who co-parent, who share equal custody across different boroughs, are caught between both boroughs arguing which parent is the lead parent, and they simply say we share custody 50-50 and therefore we need mechanisms to overcome that barrier. Secondly, increasing numbers of families are in temporary accommodation are out of their traditional borough, and they're finding it very hard to get continuity of school transport for their children. They still want them to go to their hard-fought special educational needs school that requires changes in transport, but authorities are very slow to do that. So I hope that the framework will reflect the increasing numbers of families, unfortunately, homeless and in temporary accommodation. Thank you.
I call John Whitby.
Thank you, Sir Mark, and thank you to my honourable friend for bringing the debate. Home to school transport is particularly important for young people living in rural areas like Derbyshire Dales, with the average pupil in rural areas having to travel 10 miles each way to school, and 1 in 10 pupils in a special school needed to travel over 23 miles each way. These distances mean that without home to school transport, it is often impossible for young people in rural areas to access education. For example, one constituent of mine who has ASD, ADHD, dyslexia and OCD, who was denied home-to-school transport, was expected to travel almost a 3-hour bus journey just to get to school. The burden that the current post-16 system places on families in terms of their time and their finances is significant, as is the impact for a young person who isn't in school. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last backbench speaker, I call Rachel Taylor.
Thank you, Sir Mark, and it's a pleasure to continue to serve under your chairmanship. And I'd like to thank my honourable friend, the member for Thurrock, for bringing this really important debate. We must consider the reliability of transport for SEND pupils. In my constituency, I faced casework at the beginning of term with parents who'd waited for transport to turn up that never came. Teachers didn't know what was happening, and the parents couldn't get hold of the helpline because it was closed. It's crucial those first few days for students to feel settled in, and it's great to see other colleagues from my county of Warwickshire here who I'm sure also experienced those problems back in September. My constituency is semi-rural, made up of towns and villages that can take an hour to drive across the constituency. It's difficult for county councils in constituencies like mine, where pupils are often closer to schools outside the county. Different parts of my constituency border Leicestershire, Staffordshire, Birmingham, Coventry and Solihull. The problem is that the county council may not allocate the school which is nearest to pupils in terms of travel time, but rather the school that's nearest in Warwickshire. This means parents have to argue and challenge the council if they want their children to go to a school that's suitable for their needs and is nearer for them to travel. Furthermore, the school student must be in school year 11 or below, plunging many teenagers and their families into uncertainty. So I really have to commend my honourable friend for raising this important issue, and I will remain committed to making sure that pupils in my constituency of North Warwickshire and Bedworth have the travel they need to get to school that they want to go to.
Can I thank all backbenchers who've been very good in terms of time keeping. We now move to the frontbench speakers. I call Victoria Collins for the Lib Dems.
Thank you, Sir Mark. It's an honour to serve under your chairmanship, and congratulations to the member for Thurrock for securing this debate. Every child, no matter their background, can achieve great things. But sadly, there is currently a postcode lottery where SEND provision means that a lot of our children are being left behind. The previous Conservative government failed children with SEND needs by not planning effectively for the increased demand on SEND school places. As one of my parents in my constituency wrote, please, please help. This is unbelievable. I just can't cope anymore. It's looking like you're giving me no choice but to go to tribunal just to get him to school. But as mentioned, this is about a fundamental right to education. The need is rising and the crisis is growing. And ultimately, this means that more children need to have more specific transport. The number of students on EHCP plans has doubled from 105,000 8 years ago to 230,000 in 2023. In Hertfordshire, EHCP numbers are expected to continue to grow. The number of children and young people with EHCPs has grown 223% alone in Hertfordshire. One of my constituents, Charlotte, is a parent to 3 of those children, all with EHCPs and complex SEND needs. In a constant battle mode, she says that has become the norm, and to secure educational support, one of her children, her eldest, now has to travel almost 100 miles a day just to go to school. We heard from others today who have to travel 1 hour and 45 minutes, from Polly and the impact on her parents, and many who talked about the inconsistency across their constituents, and indeed across this country. The growing need, with a lack of provision of SEND provision close to homes, means that transport is increasingly tougher, and that is exacerbated by the cuts to local transport. Many members have spoken about this and the impact that it's essential we get that transport there to take children to school safely, and has that impact on their well-being. If there is not a suitable SEND school that's local to the child, then councils are required to provide that transport to a school that has capacity but can opt out of the funding, many of which has been discussed today. The number of children travelling to specialist schools has increased by 24% in the last 5 years, and the use of taxis for transporting SEND children to and from school has increased by 36% between 2019 and 2023. And as one of the right honourable members mentioned, that's if you do get that transport, if you can rely on it actually being there. There's also, many members have talked about cash-strapped councils. We know up and down the country, councils have been let down by the last Conservative government and are struggling themselves. And many are filling that financial black hole by charging families of children. And there was a study that showed that at least 6 councils have begun consulting on proposals, with some asking families to pay as much as £933 per year. Today we also heard about Jessica and her son, and some other members who highlighted the amount that their families are paying. Ultimately, the rise in the issue of transport further highlights the issue of SEND provision near where children live. We've been let down by the last Conservative government who left SEND provision in its knees, and in Hertfordshire we were let down by Hertfordshire County Council who failed their recent report. We're facing a twin crisis in funding special educational needs and local government. Urgent action is needed to ensure that all children can access the tailored learning and support they need, and if possible as close to home as possible. That's why, as Liberal Democrats, we're calling for giving local authorities that extra funding and a fairer funding formula around SEND to reduce the amount that schools pay towards the HCP. Also establishing a new national body for SEND to support children with complex high needs, ending that postcode lottery. At the heart of this, essentially, are our children and their families who want to reach their full potential. As I said at the beginning, every child, no matter what, can achieve great things. We must not let them down.
Thank you. And for the official opposition, I call Laura Trott.
Thank you, Sir Mark, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I congratulate the Honourable Member for Thurrock for securing this important debate and for her very good speech. This is a subject impacting families up and down the country every day, and I'm glad we've been able to debate it. We've had common themes today on the need for local provision, for more specialist schools and a well-funded system with access to education, a common theme. As members have already acknowledged, under the Education Act 1996, local authorities are under a duty to provide free school transport to eligible children. This was meant to mean that no child is prevented from accessing education due to a lack of transportation, a view I believe is shared by everybody here today. However, demand is growing, and as the member for Atherton and Southampton Itchen identified, there really is a problem in terms of the numbers ballooning, and the numbers, if I run through them, really set out the problem faced. Nationally, council spending on SEND transport increased from £728 million in 2019 to £1.4 billion in 2024, and it's projected to reach £2.2 billion by 27-28, an increase of 57%. The average cost per SEND pupil in terms of transport nationally has also risen by 32% between 2018 and 2024, and the number of pupils requiring transport has also grown. The councils are transporting an average of 1,300 pupils in 23-24, up from 911 in 18-19, an increase of 43%. I know the Minister will be thinking about the causes of the demand as well as what we need to do about it, and I hope she can provide an update for us today on government thinking in this area. As members will know, the local government financial settlement for the next year is also looming. I must correct the Lib Dems opposition spokesperson, because I think she should look at what happened to local government funding when the Lib Dems were in government and then what happened after they left. But also it is important to emphasise that the Conservative government increased the high needs budget by over 60% in 2019-20 to £10.5 billion, and put in place a statutory override so that SEND-related deficits did not overwhelm council budgets. With that set to expire in 2026, what is the Secretary of State's message to local authority, particularly in rural and county areas where these pressures are most acute? I want to make sure that we have time for wrap-up at the end, and we're quite close, so I'm going to continue if you don't mind. Is she pushing the Chancellor to extend that protection for deficits to be written off? And how is the government supporting local authorities to explore innovative solutions such as shared transport services or alternative models to help manage rising SEND transport costs more effectively? Can the Minister also update us on what will be the total cost to local government of the national insurance contributions announced in the budget? What is the cost of the national insurance increase specifically for home-to-school transport? And will local authorities be fully compensated for these costs? The member for Bicester also mentioned the need for capital funding. Many members here will remember the 15 specialist schools pledged in the last Conservative budget. Can the Minister confirm that these will be going ahead? Now, I'm conscious of time, so my final word would be I pledge that we will be a constructive opposition. I think everyone here today will be clear that we support local provision, support for parents and more capital funding, and that is what we will support with the government if they bring that forward.
Okay, for the government, I call the Minister, Catherine McKinnell.
Thank you, Sir Mark, and And congratulations to the member for Thurrock for securing this incredibly important debate. And it's the importance is clearly marked by the number of contributions. I know how passionate she is about the need to secure the right support for children with special educational needs and disabilities. Indeed, she and I did a wonderful joint visit to a really fantastic school in her constituency that really demonstrates what brilliant education that is delivered inclusively for the whole community can look like. And I know that she works really hard in her area to make sure that is available to as many children as possible, and it's a vision that the government very much shares with her. Because as a government, we are absolutely committed to creating opportunities for all children so that they can achieve and thrive. And I think we all agree that no child should struggle to get to school because of lack of transport. But the testimonies that we have heard, and remarkable job you have all done, members have all done in putting forward so powerfully the voices of their constituents with only a minute to do so, but also to be able to accommodate 30 speakers, or just under 30 speakers in this debate of just an hour today on this incredibly important issue is quite a feat. So I think everybody does need to be commended, and I think your constituents will need to understand the constraints of these debates, and that you have done an incredible job in the circumstances. And it is so important, and it has come across so strong, how important it is that the transport system supports all young people to access education opportunity. And it's something that I am very keen to look at in the role I now have in the government. And so I thank you all for your, I thank all honourable members for their contributions today, and to you, Sir Mark, for keeping such good order. And I apologise in advance if I'm not able to respond to all the individual issues that I have raised. Some of them are related to local authorities and need to be addressed in the correct way to local authorities where they are the right people to respond to these issues. Others will be for the department, and so we will do our very best to follow up. And if we don't, please do contact us, because I am really keen and genuinely committed to making sure that all of the voices that you represent here today are heard as part of the way that we look at how this system is working and how we can fix it. As has already been mentioned, the department's home to school travel policy is aimed and designed to ensure no child is prevented from accessing education due to lack of transport. But clearly the challenges in that regard are significant and have been well set out today. There are also particular rights for low-income households to have support in order to exercise choice. Local authorities are obliged to arrange free travel for children of compulsory school age, and I appreciate honourable members have raised concerns about pre-school age children and post-16 age children, and I will do my very best to address those in the time that we have available. But we know that local authorities are really struggling to fulfil their duties to provide free transport, even for the current eligible children, and the cost of doing so has escalated sharply in recent years. We thank local authorities for the work that they're doing to try and support children to get to school. We know they provide a valuable service for the children and the families that can access it, particularly where they have special educational needs and disabilities. But there are many reasons for these steep increase in costs in recent years. We know there's been fuel price inflation, a shortage of drivers, passenger assistants and transport operators have all pushed up costs in the market. But we also know that this huge increase in challenge is to do with challenges within the school system itself, and specifically the way that the school system currently educates children with additional needs. We know that more children have an educational health and care plan, and more of these children are having to travel long distances to get to a school that can meet their needs. And as well as their journeys being longer, which in itself is obviously more expensive, it also reduces the opportunities for economies of scale. Fewer children are likely to travel a particular route, which means more individual journeys need to be made, and local authorities do try also to help young people aged 16 to 19 access educational training. That's extended to age 24 if you have a special educational need, and we recognise that there are significant financial pressures similarly on these budgets for transport for post-16 students. and the cost and availability of public transport can also be an issue for some 16 to 19-year-olds if they're going to travel to sixth form. I would like to take interventions, but I would also like to respond to many of the issues raised, so I do apologise that I'm not able to do so. Many local authorities offer subsidised transport, and there's also the 16 to 19 bursary, which is intended to provide support to households on the lowest incomes. But we know that for far too long, far too many children are being let down by the special educational needs system that is not working. And we are determined to fix it and to restore parents' trust that their child will get the support to flourish and have their needs met within the education system. We urgently, as honourable members have commented today, improve the inclusivity and expertise within our mainstream schools so that children, as many children as possible, can go to their local community school with their peers, and that in and of itself would reduce some of these transport pressures, but also that we do have that support available for those children that need special schools and have more complex needs. Fixing the system will also help fix the home-to-school travel challenges that we see, and making sure children can be educated locally will reduce that pressure, and it is a key priority for this government, but there are no quick fixes. It is absolutely core to our opportunity mission. Special educational needs and disabilities must be part of making sure every child can have those barriers to opportunity broken down for them. But we need to work together with parents, with schools, with councils, with the expert staff that we know go above and beyond every day to support these children. But without doubt, we recognise the challenges currently in the system. Home-to-school travel is obviously an absolute core part of making sure that children can get the education that they need and that will help them to thrive. But we know that the eligibility criteria has been unchanged since the 1940s. It's intended clearly to ensure that children can access education and that lack of transport should not be a barrier to that. But I am really keen to understand how it is working in the modern context, how we can change the education system to reduce those pressures, but also how we make sure we have a transport system that is fit for the modern age. With regard to post-16 eligibility, because I know that's been raised a number of times, I mentioned the bursary fund. Over £166 million of bursary funding has been allocated to institutions for the 24-25 academic year. It is intended to support with travel, with books, with equipment, and with clothing if that's needed. An additional £20 million is also specifically allocated to support students who are in a vulnerable group, those in care, care leavers, those supporting themselves, or who are in receipt of social security funds. So these funds should be available, but clearly they are not always meeting the children that they need them. And in addition, local authorities have discretion to make the transport arrangements that they deem necessary to post-16 students in their area, taking into circumstances local budgets, priorities, but I recognise the challenges that have all been identified, and I would urge honourable members to work with their local authorities to try and improve this on a local level, as clearly we are working on a government level too. We know that children's earliest years make the biggest difference to their life, and that's why we recognise the importance of early years and the early education. We know that that is how you deliver the best outcomes for children, and having access to those childcare settings that are appropriate in the early years is really key to meeting those early years development goals and to breaking down those barriers that may be presented later on in life. And we know that special educational needs access in particular and identifying needs at the earliest stage possible is key. And I know that many members have outlined some of the challenges that transport can pose in making sure that children have access to those opportunities. We absolutely want children and young people to receive the support they need to thrive. We want local authorities to be able to provide suitable places for children and young people. And we know that the capital funding for high needs places is a key concern for members, and we will set out plans on that capital funding shortly. I am out of time, to respond. If I have not addressed a particular issue, then do please get in touch. I want to thank honourable friends again for bringing this matter forward, for giving the opportunity for everybody to speak, for being so respectful in this debate and allowing everyone to put the voices of their constituents forward. I know it is a challenge that far too many face, and I know that we have to work together in our determination to fix this system, to give every child the best start in life.
I call on Jen Craft to wind up the debate.
Thank you, Sir Mark. And I would like to thank members from across the House who have made contributions this afternoon, particularly those in rural areas, highlighting the additional complexities of home-to-school travel there. And I thank the Minister for her considered response. I recognise that the challenges to the SEND system are immense and will take a long time to put right. My concern is, while the ultimate goal of moving inclusive mainstream education closer to children where they need it is an honourable one, and one which is clearly the direction we should be travelling in, there are children that cannot access that right now, and they cannot wait for a long-term shift in policy and a long-term shift in approach, as that will have a detrimental impact on the rest of their life. And the outcomes for children aged 16 to 19, if they don't access educational training, are well documented, which is why educational training is compulsory up to the age of 18. And the only people currently having to face a financial burden to meet their child's need and make sure that they're actually accessing this compulsory education or training mandate are parents of disabled children on a general widespread basis, which is something that needs to be looked at. I welcome that the Minister is keen to look at this in more depth and keen to look at this in her role in government and look at how it's working in practice, and I would very much welcome the opportunity to work with her on that, and indeed work with the sector and parents of SEND children more widely. I'd just like to finish by saying no one puts their vulnerable non-verbal child in a car with strangers by choice. It is because that is how you can get them to their education setting. And to reflect with gratitude on the people who have taken my child to school, and their professionalism, their absolute empathy, their way that they interact with my daughter on a daily basis is something that I believe is to be commended, as is the role that people play in this system in general. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, can I thank everybody for their indulgence in making their speeches short. We've had 33 speakers in this debate, which I think is the most anybody's ever crammed into an hour, so I hope the Guinness Book of Records is paying attention. Right, the question is that this House has considered the statutory framework for home-to-school transport for children with SEND. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting stands adjourned. Thank you.